Good morning. Welcome, everyone, to the third and probably final legislative forum of this session. On behalf of the Hutchinson Reno County Chamber of Commerce, my name is Deborah Teufel, and I'm glad to welcome you this morning. We are going to hear, I guess, what's been happening so far in the session, and maybe they've had a short break, but what these representatives expect to happen as they wrap up this session in Topeka. Please help me welcome Representative Wagner, Representative Probst, and Representative Murphy. Thank them all for coming out this morning. We also want to thank our sponsors, AT&T and Hutchinson Regional Healthcare System, for always sponsoring these events and making these possible so that you all are informed on the issues that are important to our local area and our state. And I would also like to welcome to the stage and thank our moderator, Nick Gosnell from Eagle Media. Please help me welcome Nick Gosnell. Thank you, Nick. Take it away.
Thanks, Deborah. Good morning, representatives. And I want to give each of you the opportunity to take a couple of minutes and talk about what you feel is the biggest accomplishment of the legislature heading into the legislative session, and let people know where you represent and those sorts of things. So I'll try to keep it to 90 seconds apiece, but we'll start with Paul and go from left to right as I see you, just with some opening comments.
Okay.
I see if the microphone is on or off. I'm not sure. We're having issues, I think, initially here. All right, so we'll start with Paul and let her work on the others if need be later.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Of course, I'm Representative Paul Wagner from the 104th District on the north side and up to Inman, Buhler, and Medora. From my standpoint, of course, I'm on vice chairman of House elections. Our main bill, such as it is, that passed both houses, of course, has been vetoed now. But there's maybe a fair chance we'll override the veto. But again, we've had I think a good session with a number of proposals, out there. I mean, generally with elections, things are focusing on, just where are the places where in Kansas you can make the system better, tighten it up, just give people more confidence that elections are secure and fair, and also just literally improve the process. The bill that was vetoed was a measure that had two components. The first component related to a lawsuit on a prior bill that came up about banning people from impersonating election officials. It was a couple of kind of more liberal advocacy groups sued about it. It's in court now. The fix, as it would be to make it, to kind of clarify that they have to have an intent to deceive. It's not just somebody, seeing you in sort of official uniform that somehow would think that you're part of the election office versus, you're from some advocacy group. It's also, just as a side point, the real gist of this is, and the reason I would say why Kelly vetoed it, is that there's a good chance that what the bill did would actually fix the problem, which would mean the lawsuit would get dismissed or thrown out. And if these groups can prevail on their lawsuit, the kicker is that the state has to pay all their legal fees. And so where they've been successful in the past, we actually have ended up paying $1 million, $2 million, whatever, to these groups. And if they're unsuccessful, they're having to finance their own lawsuits, which is obviously something that they don't think they don't want to do. Further, there's a question in this particular bill was about what's sort of derisively called Biden bucks, where it is the president issued an executive order telling administrative agencies to do various things as far as on voter registration and all these sort of voting related activities, even though voting is primarily a state issue. The problem there is that it never went through Congress. Obviously, it wouldn't even pass Congress. It's strictly an executive order, and so the provision in what we passed in Kansas would keep any of that money or anything that came from an executive order from actually being used, by agencies in Kansas as far as being accepted on a state level. And again, it's kind of an election back and forth, but I think it's well intentioned, and I think it is the right thing to do. Again, given the fact that this is just an executive order and not an actual bill. So that's kind of my Well over 90 seconds, sorry.
No worries. Jason, I think he went about 2:20, so that's what you have.
Is this on? Okay, there it is.
Mm.
Well, I will say that the April forum that we're at today is probably, I don't want to speak for these two, but it's a little odd because you end up the first part of session and then you get this break, and so you spend that time trying to catch up on work, and I just went and picked my car up at the shop. You try to do all these things that you have to do that you can't do during session, and then you have to suddenly put your mind back into the legislative thinking. So it's not maybe as present or as front of your mind as it is during the January and February and March sessions. I think that I represent the 102nd District, so the south part of Hutchinson. I think to me the biggest success or the thing that was really astounding to me was the conversation on taxes and the House twice unanimously voting for a compromise tax bill. I think there's a lot of talk about the disagreements, and we always come here and discuss the way we disagree about things, but the fact that something as big as tax policy, and you have 120 people, 25 people, there were a few people gone, but you roughly have 120 people agreeing on this is a good tax plan, and they do that twice. I think that's remarkable. It's a historic, actually, and so we should take a moment and consider that that's a big thing. It will, there's a lot of speculation now on whether it's going to be vetoed and what's going to happen when we come back, and that's the nature of this break. Then we have a lot of speculation about what will happen. But generally, I think that's something to be commended that the House agreed at that level. I mean, everybody said this is a good tax plan. I think that's worth, to me, that was the biggest success of the year.
Representative Murphy.
Well, thank you. 114th District, which is most of Reno County, not Hutch proper, but most of Reno County, and then all of Kingman County and eastern half of Pratt County. I'm on legislative modernization, education, and ag. I agree with Jason on the tax deal. That was kind of a neat moment, really, to get through there. Another one that I felt like was, for me personally anyway, there was, when we were working on the budget, I typically don't like voting for the budget because the budget we just spend more and more money every year, and I just like kind of my personal little thing is to say no. We don't need to be spending more. We need to be making some cuts. But on the Senate side, they brought an amendment to protect what's called 340B pricing for hospitals and for rural health centers. And what's happened that's a program that started in 1992, and it was a deal that was arranged between the government, since so many of these things are working with federal programs and everything, guaranteed a reduction in prices from the manufacturer to these organizations, and that's passed that on into us. And that had been going on from 1992 until 2020, when one drug manufacturer decided, we're not going to do that. And then since then, by 2024, 22 manufacturers have said, we're not going to do that. Well, that's began creating a problem. And once again, this is a policy and a law that had been in effect for a long time. So there were some other states that have done something like this. Arkansas had done it a couple years ago. They got sued over it. It went to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and they won. Arkansas won, and so the end result was that yes, the states can step into this and tell them that they've got to honor that. And so the amendment that was brought in the Senate and then I brought to the floor, I called Jason. I said, "Hey, Jason, need some help here." and we passed it pretty handily. And the speaker got up and spoke against it. He was mad about it and everything else like that. We don't always like to get the speaker mad at us, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So I think that was, for me, one of the bigger things of the year.
All right, going to questions that were submitted from folks ahead of time and also from the audience. And if you'd like to submit a question, they have cards in the back, and you can go ahead and do that between now and the end of the time, and they'll bring them up to me. But to open, a question that came to us in advance of the meeting, why does there not appear to be any interest in increasing the Kansas minimum wage? Costs for everything are increasing. The legislature itself had this interim group so that now they at least have a potential for the increase of their pay on the table. Why is a minimum wage bill not something that's happening in the legislature? We'll start with Representative Murphy.
I have no idea.
Fair enough.
Hadn't heard anything about it. Personally, you know, when we tell as a government, when we tell a business what they've got to pay somebody, then that affects on down the line. If I tell you you've got to pay somebody $15 an hour to sweep the floor and take out the trash, that means the person that's worth $18 or $20 an hour, since I'm overpaying my basic help, I can't pay my better help what I need to pay them. And so I think that just opens up a problem. So I prefer to stay out of that.
Representative Probst.
There's usually each year, and I didn't hear much talk this year about a bill to increase the minimum wage. Usually there's at least one bill that's submitted to increase the minimum wage, and generally that conversation is to raise it to $15 an hour. I think Kansas minimum wage is $2.30 an hour or something. We know like a lot of service staff can get a lower than the federal minimum wage, and then they have to report tips and things like that. I think there probably is good reason to have a conversation about what the minimum wage should be. At the federal level, I wish that we'd index it so we don't have to have this every 20-year discussion about what the minimum wage should be. But that being said, I always caution that even though my side of the aisle tends to favor an increase in the minimum wage is always going to be the minimum. And if we don't invest in systems that allow somebody who's earning the minimum wage, whether that's $7.25 or whether that is $15 or whether that's $30 an hour, if we don't have systems that allow that wage to provide, if people making that wage can't live, then it's not effective. There's always going to be people making a minimum wage, no matter what we do. Not everybody is going to work a high-earning job. It's just actually a byproduct of high-earning wages is service industry jobs, because people who earn higher incomes like to spend money on going out to eat and going to movies and theaters and things like that. What we really need to be looking at is to provide, in my view, structures that allow anybody at any wage to live a life with dignity and hope, and not what we have now where people making minimum wage can't even afford basic housing and food.
Representative Wagner.
Yes. You know, the minimum wage, I think, is very much misunderstood. I mean, literally, the federal minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, I mean, you literally can't hire anybody. There is an effective minimum wage, which is basically for any employer, you know, what you would have to put out as far as to even get anybody, whether, I mean, it varies by industry, whether you're in fast food or whether you're in manufacturing, that you know, it's very much kind of a myth, and again, I appreciate what Representative Probst said here, because usually it comes from sort of the Democrat side of the aisle, thinking that this actually raises people's wages, because people's wages really it's raised by your skill level, and much like what he said, and much like, you know, being here at HCC is a great example. The way to get people higher wages is to get them higher skills, and to focus on methods that when you're out of high school, that rather than, you know, this sort of four-year college business that half the people who start that direction never make it, and for various reasons, and some of them actually very good reasons. But rather than that, I mean, looking for technical training, looking for ways to increase your skills. Even the local school district, I'm drawing a little blank on the program, but even as far as soft skills, as far as, you know, a lot of young people, as they would be phrased, or new workers, I mean, just that whole thing of being on time, being reliable, just knowing the things that actually make you really valuable to a company. Because I know, you know, in my scheme of things, if I had somebody whose application for a production position and they'd had 3 years at Dillon's, you know, as a checkout clerk, you know, that is a whole lot more impressive than somebody who's jumped from 6 months here, 6 months here, 6 months here. You know, you're looking for people with some stability, who have some sort of just that sort of work attitude, which is not, I mean, you might have thought it was very American, very Kansan sort of thing, but there's plenty of counter indicators. I mean, it is something that people have to be taught, or it has to be sort of mimicked from your parents or from the adults in your life. And, the minimum wage, I mean, California raised theirs to $20, which, there's been plenty of press about the negative effects that has had, because that's clearly higher than what the market wage is. And when you get the minimum wage above the market wage, it's nuts. And it doesn't really help even to go there, because wages go up based on, economic factors and just productivity. It's not because of some base minimum wage mandate.
All right. Next question, Representative Probst. As I understood it, when everybody left for the break, the Senate side had put a motion on the floor to discuss Medicaid on their side. First of all, do you think it's going to get across to you guys on the House side? And secondly, what do you think happens if it does?
Well, yeah, there was a motion to pull the governor's Medicaid expansion bill out of committee. That won't be successful. I wouldn't anticipate. It takes, I can't think in the Senate, it's 27 votes to pull that up. On our side, I think it's 70 to pull a bill out of committee. And then it's a two-step process, actually. You have to vote to pull the bill out of committee, and then if that's successful, there's another step where you have to actually you have to make a motion then to pull it, what we call above the line, for discussion. So there's a two-step process to get a bill out of committee and up to a place where it's for a vote in the body. That system's by design very difficult, because you're in effect overruling leadership who, to that point, has said we don't want to have this discussion. So it's good that the motion's made. It draws some attention again to the fact that we can't have a real discussion on Medicaid expansion, and we can't have a vote because there's a handful of people that don't want to have the vote and don't want to have the discussion. But my prediction is that they'll vote on the motion and it'll fail, and that'll be that. It won't come over to the House side.
Okay. My apologies for asking you a Senate question, but we don't have a senator here to ask. So, and Paul, so if it's not going to make it over, is Medicaid expansion dead then for the session, do you believe?
Well, of course it is. I mean, to be honest, because there's not the votes there. And I think the Hutchinson newspaper, which I still have a subscription to for some strange reason, had one of their headlines on the whole Medicaid expansion, and it's not. I mean, in the Capitol, amongst the majority, which obviously things have to pass by the majority, it's not even a discussion that's being held, because there's no momentum. The whole sort of PR thing that the Kelly people and their friends in the press are doing is, again, I know there's people who advocate for Medicaid expansion, but this is just not the year, and don't even, I mean, even to have the hopes that were up a month or two ago was just silly. I mean, as far as what the vibe in the Capitol was versus the vibe in the press were two totally different things. So.
All right. I think we've pretty well gone through the subject, Mike, but if you have anything to comment on regarding Medicaid expansion, here's your chance.
No, not really. I agree. It's not going anywhere this year.
Okay. So as part of this larger tax policy, Paul, what is the state doing to combat inflation on everybody's cost of living, but specifically those folks that are on fixed incomes like Social Security and SSI and things like that? What provisions in the tax bill help those people?
The compromise bill that Representative Probst mentioned, and it was shocking, frankly, that you had everybody vote for it. I mean, particularly on our side, it was shocking because Governor Kelly had came over and kind of chewed these guys out, telling them, I think, kind of not to vote for it, because she had a bill that she was pushing. And so, I mean, you had a lot of people going kind of counter-indicator to what they were being, told by their, political superiors, I guess you would call it. The sad thing, though, is that the prior bill, which the entire House also supported, had actually inflation adjustment built into it on some of the increases to the exemption and the deductions. This new bill does not have that. I mean, partly that's because it's to keep the overall, cost of it, or cost, of course, it's really the benefit to the taxpayer, drops it down in the ongoing years. So you would not have that difference. But again, to have your personal exemption go up on a single up to $9,000 per person, or a couple over $18,000 is going to hit everybody, very strongly on the lower end. Going to a twofold system has a, just has a lot of sort of nice aspects to it as far as in just basic simplification. And then also you have the Social Security part where literally everything is going off. And I would throw out what I did mention to folks, I think it was last time here, what we have done as far as on fixed income has been particularly helpful. I mean, the Social Security part would be helpful for retired people who are have Social Security benefits, but we also we literally do have the property tax bill. It's like the K40 SVR form is what you need to fill out. But whatever your property tax hit when you turn 65, you actually, any difference that happens after you're 65, the state of Kansas will actually refund you the difference, which is designed to, because you have, in a lot of states, they treat people who are seniors much more, in a much more positive tax method than what Kansas does. And it's just designed so people aren't like moving to Texas or Tennessee or whatever just to get away from the taxation, which you do really feel when you are on a fixed income. And again, people over 65 who don't have an outside job are definitely on a fixed income. And I mean, their out migration is just as bad as having a bunch of 20-year-olds leave the state. And so I'm happy for that.
Representative Probst.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good in that tax plan, and the property tax part, which is one thing I've always been focused on. We raised it's only the state portion, so the 20 mills which I think we lowered to 19.5. So we lowered the mill levy on the state's portion of property tax, and then increased that on the value of your home from $40,000 to $100,000. So you won't pay the state tax on the first $100,000 of the value of a home, which in my district is going to catch a lot of people. A lot of people will not pay that state tax at all. So I think that's some savings. It's a good way to do it. Far better than some of the other mechanisms that I think were out there that would maybe have some other issues. The rebate portion, I think we increased the income level on that. I can't remember for sure, but I feel like we increased that income level a little bit. That's a good program too, that just if you're on a fixed income and you're retired, then you won't pay on the increase, and I think that's good. I think there's more we could probably do on that, but the income tax portion, and I think the reason it got support from our side, notwithstanding the governor's opposition, was that it did shift the savings down to the lower end. That changing the exemption on the bottom end changes the entire curve on who saves money, and so that was, to me, I felt much more comfortable supporting that than I did on the previous tax plan, which the curve was a little more on the higher incomes. There's a lot of talk about we went from 3 brackets to 2 brackets. I'm not terribly concerned about that. It's because of the exemption on the bottom end. I do wish that we had indexing of that going forward, because I think that's a big part of what needs to be done. Part of the reason our exemption is so low relative to other states is that we haven't indexed that for a number of years. I think over 20 years we haven't increased that. So that indexing of that and not increasing that exemption is, again, we get in these things where we don't think of things year to year or in a very future-minded way, and then all of a sudden we realize that we're way behind all of our neighboring states, so we've got to scramble and catch up, and it becomes glaringly clear that we just have avoided this conversation, and now we can't avoid it anymore. So I think we've got a lot of good things in this tax plan that will help people, and I think the original question was about inflation. There's
Right.
not much we can do at a state level and inflation is a global thing, right? We have a lot of talk, and then politically we have conversations about who's responsible for inflation. Inflation has so many variables that punch into that formula. We don't have very much control, but one thing we can do is what we're doing, which is decreasing the tax burden for people while inflation's happening to try to offset that a little bit. And inflation is dropping. I think the consensus revenue estimates came out yesterday, and their prediction is that inflation's dropping to about 2.5%. So we're seeing a steady decline in inflation. But the only thing we really can do is say we'll try to save you money on taxes, and you can use that money to compensate for inflation.
Let's make clear what the words decline in inflation mean before I talk to Mike, because I'm sure he'll want to anyway. It means prices are still going up, just not as much as they were. Now, Mike, anything about the tax bill that you want to add to what's already been said?
Well, no, I'm going to talk about something else.
Sounds good.
Actually, it is part of it because I tried to get an amendment on the initial tax bill.
Okay.
That would help address this. If you look at what the price of gold has done, we're going to step off into something else here. What the price of gold has done in the last year is up about 20%. Now, what does that mean? That's inflation. Because gold basically stays the same. It's the fiat currency that changes in relation to that. And so we can say that our inflation is under control, it's whatever else like that, but if it's 20%, that's pretty dramatic. And you feel that, you know that when you go to the grocery store, when you go buy anything, you know what's going on. Insurance is up, taxes are up because of inflation, taxes go up, everything, it really dominoes. And so one thing I tried to do, and I know I mentioned it in a previous forum about making gold and silver legal tender, there is a way to make it to where the state actually could have its own currency. Now, that wasn't the initial goal of the bill, but that it would sort of lead the way. If you could have your money in gold and silver rather than in a bank, where it's just losing value, that would help you offset inflation, and we don't have to deal with it at the state level. That just lets the market take care of it. And so I hope this conversation can continue.
Yeah, it's kind of like playing Monopoly and having people do what the rules don't say to do, and they put an extra $500 in for free parking. That doesn't necessarily change anything for most folks, at least if it doesn't actually pass through and get all the way through the process. Now, there is a proposal to have a new Office of Early Childhood that the governor wanted to have in her State of the State address to try to get all the different parts of kids before they get to school all in one office. Do we know where that is right now, Mike? Did anything pass with regard to that?
Yeah, we passed it off in the on the House side. Did the Senate? The Senate didn't take it up. I got involved in it quite a bit. I had a family in Kingman actually who has a healthcare center, and I worked with them because I didn't personally know anybody involved in this, like that. So they were able to help me. They said what we were trying to do initially with that bill in the House was really going to screw things up, and which is typical for what we do. And they had been working for a year and a half to try to adapt new rules and regulations that would improve safety and also make more slots available and all like that. And so they had those rules and regs written. They were in Kobach's office. He had looked at them and said they are legal. You can do this. And so they were all ready to roll that out. And then we came up with this this new plan, and it was just going to undo all that. And so ultimately what happened is those rules and regulations that they had negotiated and worked on got rolled into this new, through the amendment process, got rolled into this plan. And so I think it's going to, if it goes through, I don't know what the Senate's going to do, because they have a tendency to look at stuff and not figure it out very easy. I don't know what their problem is over there. I'm planning on going over there and fixing it.
Yes, that Representative Murphy has filed for the Senate seat from the area along with Bob Fee. So just for that, that wasn't just a flip comment. He's actually running. So just to clarify, this is now I'm just going to bang right on the third rail, Jason. So here we go. But Kansas voters voted back a couple of years ago on the Value Them Both amendment and voted overwhelmingly not to have that be adopted. And And between that and the fact that they have voted in a Democratic governor for a second time, but a Republican legislature that is dominating as far as number of seats, doesn't that mean that that Kansans want to find some way to meet in the middle? And what have you seen that would accomplish that, first of all, with the abortion issue, and secondly, generally?
Well, that's a lot. But also, if you'll allow it, Nick, I hate to like point out disagreements or things with my colleagues up here, but on the child care bill, there's some things I need to correct.
Okay, that's fine.
The regulations that Representative Murphy mentioned, those are still going into effect. There's nothing, I was heavily involved in the negotiations on the child care bill on the House side, because the bill came through the Commerce Committee, and I'm the ranking member on that, so we were working that bill through Commerce. The regulations, KDHE made a number of regulation changes to the child care infrastructure, and one that's really important is that we change the age of infant from 18 months to 12 months. That's going to increase capacity. And there were a lot of regulation changes. I don't remember all of them right now, but a lot of them were designed to create an easier regulatory environment for child cares and also to increase capacity. All of those things are still going through. The AG's office approved those. There is a public hearing scheduled for June 4th. Those regulations are still going into effect, and there's nothing in Senate Bill 96, which is the child care bill, that will undo that part of the regulations. In fact, part of the agreement was that through regulation, we will increase capacity even more once the bill becomes law. There was an agreement between the governor's office and the House leadership that said, because they wanted to put a lot of these changes in statute, which creates a whole nother set of problems. Now you've moved child care regulation from a policy that can be addressed administratively to a statute violation, which now is like, what do you do? Are you going to have your county attorney prosecute if somebody has 2 kids too many? Like that's the problem with putting this in statute. So we were able to get that fixed, but I just wanted to make that correct, that there's those regulations that increase capacity and make it an easier regulatory environment for child. Those are still going on, and 96 won't change that. 96 just, what it really does is take an agent, creates an office and consolidates a system that spans 4 different offices. This DCF is involved, KDHE is involved, the Children's Cabinet's involved, and the Department of Education is involved, and it brings that all under one roof so that there's a lot that's a lot more streamlined. And I think even some conservative members of the House recognize that this is something that needed to be done for a very long time. So now on to the other question.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think, so I see the way elections play out, and I don't know how much of that is like what people want and how much of that is just historically how Kansans behave. Governors in Kansas get blamed or they get the credit for the way things are going. And the legislature somehow always manages to, I mean, my standing joke is if you're mad about anything, blame a Republican because they've been in charge forever, right? There's only been 2 times that Democrats have had control of either house in the legislature. We blame governors, but we keep electing a lot of the, like, in our state's history, largely we let the legislature go unchecked when most of your taxing and budgeting decisions are coming from the legislature. And there are some weird things that we put into budgets, and I found some, like a $600,000 budget item for a nonprofit company for operational expenses. Like, we had this little bit of discussion for a company whose CEO gets paid $650,000 a year. Why are we putting that kind of money into one company? Well, it's weird political things that we cram into budgets because people want them. If you're really curious, go look and see how much money Salina gets in the budget, and then track down who puts it there. I mean, there's a lot of weird things that happen in the budget. So all of that to say, I think Kansans they like to blame governors for problems, and they also like to reward governors if they think they're doing a good job, but somehow the legislature stays the same, largely, and then we end up with a very divided government, and we end up with what we have now, which is this kind of a lot of back and forth and trying to navigate that politically, and it makes politics a much bigger part of the policy discussions, and I think that It's probably the best way I can answer that.
Okay. Wow. Spent 2 minutes on a question, and a question that I intended to be about abortion and did not use the word abortion. Very well played. But Paul, there were a couple of vetoes that Governor Kelly had on Friday of different provisions related to the abortion issue that have made it through the legislative process. So I guess I'll ask it this way. Speaking generally, with a Republican legislature that has supermajorities, do you expect those issues potentially to come back as part of what's dealt with during the veto session?
Okay, I'm going to play a probes and go back to the child care question first.
Okay.
So, no, but the child care bill, is very important because it's clearly an area that sort of transcends just strictly, parents who want to have somebody watch their kids, while they're working. It does have economic development aspects. It has a whole bunch of sort of ramifications. I will highlight, and it was kind of impressive. We had a couple moments like this this year in the House, at least, where there was a bill. Republicans were all on board for it. We were ready to shoot it out. It was going to go be on the floor like one day, and then they held up because the governor had kind of a counter, as I understand it. Jason will probably know more, but the governor's side, or second floor, as they say, had a counter sort of thing, like could we sort of mesh this together and make it work, and in the end both sides were agreeable to do that, and so you actually have a bill that is not going to get vetoed. You do have the Senate side. I will make a point that the Senate side, there's a couple senators who were the initial ones who got the child care bill going, and they have a very vested interest. I'm a little concerned that the Senate hasn't taken it up yet, that somehow the changes might be a bit too much for them. But I would be optimistic because it does reduce the amount of regulation. It makes it easier to set up a child care, and just child cares are something that you can set up like it's like a solo partnership business. You can run a small one yourself, as it would be. And it does just clarify some of the rules and regulations. I do know the difference was, my memory is, the governor's original proposal had actual state general fund money going in sort of for different subsidies for child care centers. I'm pretty sure the bill that we passed just has some tax credits. I don't think it actually has money, which of course is part of the philosophical difference on this topic. Okay, enough child care. Okay. Okay. So, you've had since the August 22 vote, the value of them both thing, which again, the problem has been in my state. Well, this year you have seen this sort of, Kansans for Life, the basically sort of pro-life coalition. There's a couple different groups that work together on these, that they have been basically, since there's not really much, if anything, you can do right now in the current, Supreme Court environment, plus the fact, of course, it's been underreported how, much like what we said is that, if you let the Hodes ruling stand and you don't have legislative power at all in this topic, that you are going to see a consistent dismantling of any regulations which were not considered controversial. These are bills that passed, 10 years ago on a, 115 to 10 vote in the House, and similar margins in the Senate. Things about, age restrictions, 24-hour requirements, just certain, health standards and whatever, doctor privileges for, abortion centers and things like this. But all of those regulations actually are going away. They literally, if you talk to people where they're unenforceable. And so the notion that what happened this year, you had for pregnancy care centers, much like you have like for interfaith housing, a lot of nonprofits, there are special like tax credits that if you did donate to it, there's a 70% tax credit. And so they were going to do that for, pregnancy care centers, of which like Open Door is a good example here in Hutch, would qualify, possibly birthright, but it's so small, I'm not sure if it would, but there's basically 50-plus pregnancy care centers in Kansas, that deal with people or with women, who, come to them for either generally, pregnancy tests initially, but just, they are pregnant and they're wanting some help in just different ways. The thing was, it's not directly like an abortion bill, and yet Governor Kelly vetoes it, and yet the vast majority of Democrats voted against it, and yet, we're having to have a fight over it, which would seem to be a sort of something that everybody could rally around. I mean, why is not this topic or this type of, bill something that folks would wrap themselves around? And you have a couple different things. You have very good example. I mean, the notion of what's called abortion coercion, and anybody who has worked in, truth be told, I was a board member for Open Door for like 6 years, before I ran for the House. So I'm not a counselor person. Trust me, I'm not a counselor person. But I am aware of the issue and just really what goes on in the nitty gritty of a center versus just something theoretical. And it was just really shocking, frankly, that when the one bill going back to the pregnancy care centers came up, half the Democrat caucus in the House had just a very snarky statement of vote. I mean, just talking about these things are unethical and really attacking pregnancy care centers. I mean, give me a break. And again, for Laura Kelly to go back to the value them both vote and somehow mean that people don't want anything done in this area when you have opinion polls that clearly show that. You have that when these regulatory aspects, were in play, that they passed overwhelmingly. They weren't like extremist positions at all. And so I'm really dismayed, I guess would be an understatement, with how much of this, just simply because it, in a general way, deals with a topic, that it meets with such fierce and hostility from the other side. So maybe that answered your question, but.
No, my question was, do you believe leadership will try to
Yes,
override the veto?
Yeah. I mean, all of these, and basically just the whole veto thing, if you have 80-plus votes and it's plausible that you can override, you're going to go for it. We do have a problem in the House because one of our solid Republicans, Michael Hauser from Southeast Kansas, he actually has cancer, and it's very serious. He's now like stage 4. I mean, they do have people. I mean, I think he's in good enough shape that, and they have done this before for people who are, literally pass away 2 months later, where they'll come to the Capitol for like 3 hours to vote, because you literally have to have, if they're not there, it doesn't matter that they support the override, it doesn't count. And so I think all these measures will come up for a veto override because I think we have the votes to do it.
Okay. Mike, any comments on what the other two have said? I want to be sure I let you start on childcare, so I guess you're kind of stuck with the abortion topic.
Well, the last question was just about overrides. It wasn't
It was
about abortion.
just about overrides. Yeah, exactly. Are they gonna override or not? Do you think?
Yeah, there's several of them that will override. There's some that were probably that were short, that was like maybe 77 or something like that, and I don't know if they'll even attempt those. But the number of the ones that fell a little bit short, it was because there were people that were missing, for one reason or another. So I don't know how many there are. Actually, I was gone about all day and didn't get home until about 11 o'clock last night, and so I haven't really seen what all I heard she vetoed a bunch yesterday, but I don't even know what all was in that yet.
That was, to my mind, the most controversial, and I use that in air quotes, of anything that was on the list. Just there was a couple of technical trailer bill type things and those kind of things that also were on the list of vetoes, but nothing as straight answer as what that was. I don't think.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. I think we can override some of that stuff, and it's. A lot of this stuff, like I said, is not terribly controversial when you get right down in the weeds, to it. If we were trying to say, draw lines and stuff like that, what you can and can't do, that's a different story, but that's not what this was.
Okay. Jason, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the accomplishment that you've worked years on getting land contract policy fixed at the state level. It looks like that's finally going to happen. Can you explain?
Yeah, I'm glad to. So that's been about a 6-year effort to work on land contract legislation. Basically, if you are a renter, you're protected by the Landlord-Tenant Act. If you buy a home with a mortgage, you're protected by inspections and all the rules that realtors and banks have to follow. But if you buy a house on land contract, there's nobody even knows that that's a recorded transaction, unless the people doing it on their own report that. So we had an issue, this actually predates me being in the legislature, but years ago we had some really unsavory characters here in town who were selling houses on land contract that they didn't have the right to sell. They didn't have title to the house. This is a really underreported problem because when it happens, the people who had been paying to buy the house usually just go on because they need another place to live. And so they usually don't have the resources to sue. That's the only remedy that existed, is you could go to court and try to sue.
Jason, I also want to clarify one point. Land contract, if somebody says they're renting to own a house, that's what they mean.
Yeah, it uses different terms. Rent to own, contract for deed, all fall under the land contract provisions. So it basically, we just did some very simple things. The main things is that you can't sell a house on land contract or contract for deed if you have an encumbrance on the property, and you have to be very clear if you do, and you have to get the permission of the buyer on all of those things. And it also creates a reporting mechanism so you can file that with the affidavit with the Register of Deeds. And if you violate this law, it's considered a deceptive practice under the Consumer Protection Act, and that triggers the Attorney General getting involved. I think I'm really happy about it, and it's the sort of thing where, I started it 6 years ago and worked on that, and it's been through a number of iterations, went through the Judicial Council where we had some hearings on that. I'm very happy that got through. And, it got the support of a chairman, Nick Hoheisel, who chairs the Financial Institutions Committee. And we worked with bankers and credit unions and realtors and a lot of different people who have a vested interest in this, and came up with a solution that everyone agreed to and that no one had any real opposition to. So I feel like it was a good common sense way to solve a problem that we have basically just ignored there's never been any governing legislation over land contracts before, so I'm really happy and proud of that achievement. Thanks for asking that question.
Oh, yeah, because anything that you can manage to keep the people's eye on the ball for 6 years in Topeka. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or some new party I haven't heard of yet. I want to be sure to highlight that, because that takes a lot of just stick-to-itiveness to get something done over that period of time, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. Paul, what is the unfinished business other than veto overrides for the legislature at this point? What do you guys still need to do?
Okay, if I can jump to Jason's things real
Sure.
quick. No, I do want to highlight, again, sitting here listening to Jason talk for the last, 6 years, that he the land contract thing is really, truly on his heart. And again, Nick Hoheisel, it's nice when you're a Democrat to have a Republican who really has a lot of confidence in you. And Hoheisel, all he ever talks about is probes, frankly. It's just, drives me nuts. But nevertheless, it is a good bill, and it really, it does take time to get things, but it helps to have a chairman who's like a champion for it, or who helps, get over the hurdles, and it is very kind of common sense legislation. Secondarily, in somewhat the same general topic, I do want to mention, because I have had people email about this. The question about squatters, because you've seen some things in the news where, people coming across the border, as it would be, and they can, take your house when you're gone on vacation, and you can't throw them out, which in Kansas, just to clarify, in Kansas, somebody has to have a property for 15 years of squatting before they have any sort of legal, rights to it. Otherwise, it's strictly, they're just like a renter who has not paid their rental fee, and you totally, all the rights are on the side of the property owner. Just sort of fun fact, just in case anybody's worried. As far as things we didn't, I'm a little, some of these things have to get figured out. Of course, we haven't done the final education budget, has not actually been approved. It went back to conference committee, and so that's going to be something that as I understand it, it's not going to be that much different from what we were looking at originally. But you really have to hand it to this particular legislature. I mean, you had the civil asset forfeiture bill, which is really a pretty big deal, where people were losing property. I mean, the police have a right, if they stop you, that they can seize it if it is possibly connected to illegal activity, and there had been obviously some definite abuses for it. And it was, there was sort of a grand compromise between law enforcement and everybody else who was pushing for it. It really had a lot of traction on all the different sides. You had that. You had the on unemployment insurance. There was a bill that fixed a lot. That was kind of a big coming together moment. You had on the workers' compensation another big kind of reform package, because Kansas, and again, as an employer, back, 20, 30 years ago, where I can remember, we had very high workers' compensation rates, and when the legislature reformed that 20 plus years ago, it clearly made a difference in the rates that employers were paying. At the same point, it did make it much harder for employees to get workers' compensation claims, and the amounts were limited, probably more than other states. I think this new bill starts ratcheting it up to make Kansas a little more comparable. But again, it is hard to get everybody to the table together, and you can't have these kind of knockdown, drag-out fights between the doctors versus the nurses, or the credit unions versus the banks, or whatever. But when people kind of can see the commonality of interest, that you actually can get legislation that actually does solve the problems, and everybody pretty much agrees with that it was a good thing going forward. And so I don't have I'd have to think specifically about things that we haven't done that I thought we would, could, or should. And again, some of the things are slightly hung up in the Senate that still need to be looked at. So there could be one or two things I'm not coming to my head right now, but
Sure.
Otherwise, I would focus more on the accomplishments. I think a lot has happened this year, a lot more than I would have imagined, to be honest.
Well, in an election year, getting much of anything done from a legislative perspective is an accomplishment. Mike, he mentioned the education bill. Is that do we know even what that form is going to take, or is that all still conference committee stuff that we've got to deal with?
Yeah, it's conference committee, so I don't really know what's going on with that yet, and haven't seen anything. I heard that they've kind of came to an agreement pretty quick, but we were already gone. So, but I have not seen it, not been privy to it or anything.
Okay, and maybe I should have Jason clarify again what the process is when things get to conference committee, because it's very straightforward, which is both good and bad.
Well, in a perfect world, you have a House version of a bill and a Senate version of a bill, and there's some differences, and so you bring the conference committee together, and they hash out those differences and negotiate an agreement. That's ideally how it works. Often what happens is the conference committee becomes a vehicle to reimagine the piece of legislation altogether, and we start bringing in ideas. And I think that's what's happened with the education bill. And like Mike said, they were negotiating that while we were on the House floor. And by the time they reached an agreement, I haven't seen the report, so I don't know what's in it. But I think, the process gets a little messy in conference committee and at the end of it. And now that I'm in some of these conference committees more often, it's an really interesting process where it becomes more about the House versus the Senate and less about Democrat versus Republican, where the House has a position that they're trying to protect, and the Senate has a version they're trying to protect, and you're trying to negotiate what you're willing to accept from each one. That's kind of how the process works on conference committee.
Right, but the point I'm trying to, that I want to be sure people know if they aren't familiar with the process is when you get to the point of a conference committee report, which is supposed to be the one final version of a bill, it is an up or down vote. It's a yes or no vote. It's a whatever is in this, however many bills get put together to turn into this conference committee report, which sometimes they have as few ingredients as a pound cake, and sometimes they have as many ingredients as baked Alaska. It just depends on the bill. But it's up or down when you get to that point.
That's right.
So
no amendments, you get to vote it or send it back.
So go ahead, Paul, to talk about that a little bit.
No, I do actually, because it was also one thing I was impressed with very much with the House this year, because conference committee reports are also what they're called crap sandwiches. You know, you have a good thing on the out, and then you have crap in the middle. You know, I mean, there's, you know, you have like 3 or 4 things you got to vote together on, and so it's an up or down vote. So what are you going to do? But you actually had, and a great example, the tax bill. You know, the original tax bill, you know, was a conference committee report that basically the governor and the Senate kind of thought was a good idea, and all it did was just reduce the top tax rates. I mean, it was totally, when you'd hear it, at least I know on our side, it was like, what the heck? And you actually had, you know, Stephen Owens out of Heston, who has a lot of credibility, a very good rep. And it was very interesting because you had, you know, a private GOP caucus where, you know, just the opposition to it, you know, came out. You know, I mean, it was a really tense was not quite the right word, because you did have the speaker, Dan Hawkins, say, no, he wants this bill passed, but people were saying, just sorry, but this is just not, this is just bad legislation. And so Owens got up there and he made a motion to re-refer it back to committee, you know, and so it's kind of your one option that's not an up or down vote. And the nice thing, it did re-refer back to committee, and they had told us that it might take like 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get something. You know, you never know what's going to happen, and we might walk away with no tax bill. And you know, how do you want to be on the ballot like that? People just said, to heck with it. You know, this is a bad bill. We can do better than this, and it actually worked. I mean, it was really, you know, everybody. I mean, the Senate side, everybody, you know, basically, okay, yeah, we got to fix this. But the other part with the reference to conference committee reports, but then you had like 2 or 3 other times that same day where people made motions to re-refer bills, and it was, and in one of the cases, I think Poskins on the Democrat side, but it was one that on the Republican side, somebody made a motion to re-refer, and it was like, you know, the Democrats were jumping up for joy too, because they thought it was a bad, you know, sucked, I guess is my and just, but you know, but rather than being forced into a vote that was a bad, it was just bad to have a yes or down vote, to send it back to see if you could make it better. And again, Kerry Barrett, who's a Republican, made a motion on another bill, and I don't remember, you know, the prior 5 years, and Jason would know this, I had hardly ever seen a re-refer motion, and you actually had people. Now that the cat's out of the bag, it's like we don't have to have these conference committee reports that we think are terrible, that we can make to re-refer it and see if we can't get something better.
Okay. Mike, do you happen to know off the top of your head how much of the business that got done in the session thus far happened, for one of a better way of putting it, after business hours? We used to call it the KS Legislature After Dark when I was covering the legislature. Because previous iterations of the legislature used to take things to midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. to get them done, especially in the end of the session and especially in the veto session. I think there's been a lot less of that this time around. At least I haven't heard about it as much.
Well, I don't know. I'm not involved in a lot of that.
Well, I just mean, how much voting did you guys do after the regular day?
Not very much. This was actually probably one of the better of the 4 years I've been there. Probably one of the better ones. And going back to what Jason and Paul were talking about, another one that got sent back. There was another tax bill that dealt more with property tax and all. And like I said, the crab sandwich, making sausage, whatever you want to call it, this is when stuff gets put in, stuff they cannot get across the floor. They stuff it in a deal like this because they know that everybody wants these 6 things, and we're going to put these 2 other things in there. And everybody will, well, I want the 6 things bad enough that I'll swallow hard and all like that. Well, this bill had a couple things in it that people, I mean, a lot of us really did not like. And so I think it was Bill Clifford got up and made a motion to refer it. But we pointed it out. So these are the things that we want out of here. Send it back to committee and fix it, and then we'll pass it. So I'm glad to see this sort of thing happening because I don't know, the first couple of years up there, you know, I just hated this last week because it was, and of course when you're first there, all this stuff's is this the way it really works? You know, you can't believe it, and I'm glad to see that we're kind of figuring out that we've got a way to kind of fix that a little bit. But as far as, you know, getting, I don't know how much. I mean, obviously when we're just eating dinner somewhere or whatever like that, we talk about things and all like that, but it's not, obviously you can't get a bunch of, you can't have a committee together eating dinner and talking about it. That's an open meetings issue. But people can, you know, lots of times you can iron out, you know, Jason and I can sit there and eat dinner and we can kind of, you know, okay, I see your point, and you see mine, and we can kind of, and so that sort of helps smooth the way for when you get into committee, that now we better understand each other's point of view. And those sorts of things, I think, happen, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Jason, I don't remember where this ended up, so and somebody asked a question about it, so I'm going to leave it out there. What was called the dark stores bill. In other words, about having property assessment for those places that aren't open anymore be different, which in effect, on a state level, would shift the tax burden to other folks. Where did that end up at?
Well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was in the bill that Mike and Paul were just talking about. There was a bill that had, if I remember, 2 provisions dealing with property tax that were specifically for veterans and disabled veterans that a lot of people supported. And they combined those 2, these pro-veteran bills, with this dark store theory, with the Genesis tax exemption thing that they've been trying to get for a decade. And people were, I do want to say, like, and we'll go into election season here pretty soon, and we'll go back to our normal, like, everybody's terrible and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, there were a lot of really good examples of the House acting in what I view as the best interest of Kansas along, like, regardless of party lines. And that was a moment as well, to watch that bill go back to committee and to watch people in the Republican caucus stand up against their leadership and say, it's unconscionable that you put these veteran bills with these dark store bills and these other tax policies that you want just so that you could force us to vote for something we don't want, that we haven't had a discussion on, and we're not gonna let you use veterans that way. That was really impressive to see. But that dark store theory, to move it on to that, just if you don't know what that is, the idea of that is that a store like Walmart or Target or any retail property, big box store, would have its tax appraisal at the value as if the building was empty and there's no business happening in there, which drastically reduces their property value. And of course, then what happens in a local community is that there's going to be a strain on the local budget, and then that burden is probably going to be shifted onto as it often is, shifted onto residential property taxpayers. So really, that's a huge policy. Like, that requires a lot of examination and discussion. And so that was put in with these other bills that are politically popular to try to force support for it. So in that moment to see that, so it's right now it's not done, and it's not done because the House said, we're not gonna let you do this to us. We're gonna make you have a discussion about putting, if you wanna talk about veterans and what's good for them, we'll have that discussion, but these other things need to be taken out of that. And that was a really good moment. And there's been a number of good moments like that this year, I think.
What's the current rule, whichever one of you wants to take this, on how many bills can be bundled together? Is there one? You all can decide.
Well, the joke sometimes new people say, they'll come in and they'll say, well, the House, according to House rules, you can't do this. And I say, I think it's cute that you still think that rules matter. Like, the rule in a self-governing body is that we can change the rules, we can suspend a rule, we can make a new rule. I mean, we do this with the midnight rule. We only did it once this year that I can remember.
And that's where I was going.
Yeah.
With the previous question.
Yeah, one time I think, which we did it a lot more often under previous leadership. This leadership's been pretty, I think it helps that Dan has an early bedtime. I think he likes to go to bed early, so. But we can suspend a rule. We have a rule in the book that says we don't vote on bills after midnight. And every year we'll have a motion to suspend that rule. When we go back, we'll suspend Rule 4K. You remember, we'll do this. This is the joint rule between the House and the Senate that says we have to have a certain amount of time between the bill coming from the Senate to us before we take it up. And we will, every day during the veto session, suspend Rule 4K to make it so that we can immediately take up a Senate provision right away. So rules don't matter. It's, what was the show that used to be, like,
Yes.
Whose Line Is It, Everybody? Like, rules, you know, everything's made up and the rules don't matter anyway. That's the legislature.
Okay, but yeah, that was the overarching point I was getting to. Is you've only suspended the midnight rule once, and that it, now I've always thought when I was covering the legislature, why didn't somebody bring forward legislation to say, I don't care how many days it takes us, but do it during business hours, so that real people could actually watch and be a part of the process if they want to be. But that never got any traction, even in my editorial office, let alone on on the floor of anything. The main thing I guess I would say for you guys we've still got about 20 minutes left if you want to just opine, I suppose. But the veto session, things come at you fast. You end up with dozens of different ideas that you have to deal with in not very long. How do you get the answers that you need to make an intelligent vote, Mike, on subjects that you weren't on the committee for the original bill, you weren't on the conference committee, you weren't on, your only piece of the process is this vote that now you have to take. How do you become informed on that, especially when they suspend Rule 4K and things go back and forth across the rotunda pretty fast?
Well, most of this stuff doesn't just come out of the blue. I mean, it's been talked about, dealt with, something like that. We may not have been able to see the exact legislation so we know how it's all spelled out, but we don't, it's not like somebody came up with a new color in the box of Crayolas that we have to figure out, you know, how it fits. So we can generally go back and we've got notes, we've got previous stuff. We've got quite a bit. A lot of us carry these things or a laptop, and there's quite a bit of information available to us. One thing Jason mentioned a little bit earlier, I just want to kind of touch on, is it's not a criticism, or not a disagreement, not even a disagreement. He mentioned, you know, getting these people together like lobbyists and stuff like that. When we come, now I don't know what they tell you on your side, but when we come in there, they say, you guys aren't experts on everything, and so these lobbyists, you know, they are experts in their field and all like that. And you need to, you know, you can rely on them to help educate you. Well, who do they work for? You know, they don't work for the people. We work for the people. You know, I represent you. A lobbyist represents somebody that pays them. And so when we get into these bills and everything like that, we say we're getting everybody together and the lobbyists all agree and everything like that. I'm going, well, wait a second. We're kowtowing to these special interests to get something done. My special interest is you. And I think that's what we need to be, I think that's where we need to be kind of going. And I feel like we maybe are moving that direction a little bit. Because there have been some things that have happened that have gone against lobbyists. When I was working the ESG legislation, this is something I'd hope to get Jason on board with me because it's consumer protection. But the bottom line is that got fought off by special interests and lobbyists, and they were not protecting anybody in Kansas. They were protecting bigger outfits not even outside the state, but outside the country. And so those are the sorts of things that we need to learn to kind of bow up against. And grow a pair or, or however you want to call it. And I see some changes happening, and I'm hoping it continues.
Jason, how much can legislative research help you guys in terms of that education, and how much do you need to rely on those people that are being paid to be subject matter experts to find out what needs to happen?
Well, especially when you're dealing at the end of the session, like at the end of the irregular session and during veto session, you get a lot of the conference committee reports where they put these things together. And, Mike's right, you do have at least some idea that these things have been out there, that these ideas have been there. But there are in conference some new components that are put into bills that you maybe haven't seen before. And the rule is you get 30 minutes, like from the time I don't want to use the acronym or the alphabet soup, but it's a conference committee, CCR, conference committee report, hits your desk. The rule is you have 30 minutes from the time that hits the report to when you can take a vote. So you really are only going to have 30 minutes to review that, and you're getting a very watered down version of what the bill does that the research department provides to you. So everybody has to find a way to navigate this massive amount of information in a short period of time in the way that I think you as an individual are most comfortable with. I try to read as much as I can, but even there's times that I can't read all the things that are coming at us. But then there are other people that I have trusted relationships with, and this goes back to what Mike's talking about, where you maybe have dinner with someone, and I have people that I know that are going to shoot me straight on something, some Democrats and some Republicans, and I'll go talk to them about what you were on this committee, you heard this information, what does this mean? You have to do it the way you can in the time that you have, because the other option is to just use a political lens and decide I'm going to vote for or against something based on politics, and that's not, I think, the most productive way to do that. I think if it's good policy and it conforms in some way with your own personal ideas on things, or if it conforms with your district's ideas on things, then I think you can try to get that information and look at it through that lens. So that's what I do. I try to read what I can. I try to talk to different people that I trust and rely on for different information, and then use that information, because you're right, it does come at you quick, and it's a lot of information to try to figure out. And frankly, you miss some things too. I think, we come out and we, talk, and it's, we live in an environment where people expect perfection in a lot of areas of life, and politics is one of those, and you're never supposed to admit that you don't know, or you aren't sure, or you aren't completely confident. But the truth is, a lot of us are voting on things, and sometimes we don't always know every detail that's in it. Even if you read the report, that report was written by somebody who, in research, who probably got handed this conference committee report at midnight and had to get it written before the next morning when we come in at 9 o'clock. They might make errors in it. And I've actually found that before, where if you read the body text of the bill and you read the conference committee report, there are key things that are missing. And there's nothing malicious about that. It's just the nature of the work. So I think that's all you can do, is try to manage that the best you can by building relationships, talking to people, and then doing as much research on your own as you can.
So, Paul, to reiterate the question to both Mike and Jason, just what do you do to get information when you have so many things you're going to have to deal with? The veto session is on purpose done as quickly as it can get done, because everybody wants to be finished. But that leaves you with a lot of topics all at once.
The veto part of it is actually pretty easy, because those are sort of high-profile bills, and your knowledge of them is pretty well set, and which way you're going to vote. That doesn't tend to be the hard part. The conference committee reports. A lot of people, me included, have always hated it because stuff comes at you quick. Some of it seems very suspicious. A lot of it you're going on political instinct as to what makes sense or not. I will say, though, I think you would be impressed in Topeka that you really have a very good staff. The legislative researchers. I don't really feel any sort of political bias. They'll research stuff that you ask them. They really shoot you pretty darn straight. And they've been super helpful on just different topics, where, again, part of it, though, is having representatives who think quickly enough to, I'm going to send a thing to legislative research because that's coming up tomorrow. about some particular data. They've been very helpful. Like for instance, on the child care bill, you could actually get data from what do other states do, like what are their ratios and such. I mean, this sort of comparison with other states. One of the things that has also been encouraging this year is one of my personal beefs, as it would be, being a business owner. When we get these budgets, it is just gobbledygook. If you're not on appropriations, and even appropriations, I don't think half the people really understand the budget. But it's not presented well, and there were a number of things I brought to the attention of either people, not so much in the appropriations, but just House leadership, that we needed to change this, and they said, yeah, that's very true. People, it is confusing. They came up with I think a better format for it. On conference committee reports, I was out there 2 weeks ago talking to legislative research. It's like there are different ways. Here's it's like a Cliff Notes version, but what they could do to make it more immediately understandable about what's going on, because it's familiar, but it's not familiar. Voted on it back in February, and just but there are things I think that would really help us understand immediately what is in the bill and what isn't, so that you don't have stuff so readily being shoved in there. But again, it's just due diligence. It's trust but verify, and much like my colleagues here have said, that it's you have other legislators. You say, what do you think about this? Does that what's really going on with it? And a lot of times you'll get a lot of information that's really helpful in making a good decision. And though I will say one thing people also should be realized, you actually, and I think the Democrats would agree as well, I think that the House leadership this last 2 years was definitely an improvement over the prior 2 years. That as far as just being, Hawkins, who's a Bueller High School graduate, we've had a couple times where it's called like rolling the chair, where the caucus votes against the leader. And generally, some leaders go ballistic and they're retributions. Other people, they just roll with the punches. It's just like, okay, that happens, but I'm still a leader. You guys know that. There's only, but you've had a lot more, I think, relaxed environment than what you had before. We affectionately, on the Republican side, we call them the junta, because they're all military. Hawkins is retired military reserve, Croft is retired active military, and the pro tem, Blake Carpenter, is actually a current intelligence officer in the military reserve. So they make the trains run on time. I think they've made the legislature work better here these last 2 years.
So, Paul, as we know it right now, and I don't know how much is still left to be handled in the end of omnibus or whatever, but how much bigger is the Kansas SGF now than it was last year?
Okay. Actually, and I do want to highlight this, because I always, I have the newsletter that I send out. They give you a certain amount of funds to do it. I always have my Kansas finances over the last 5 years, a little chart. And literally the kicker is, in Kansas, state general fund spending, in fiscal year like 2021, was like just under $7.5 billion. We're just under $10.5 billion. In 4 years, it really all is on a historic tear. The funny thing is, as much as, education has sort of the Gannon decision and such, it's kind of forcing it up on a certain level, but it's been all the other topics. We really, that is generally something people should be concerned about. Kansas, doesn't have very good budgetary control. You might think having a bunch of Republicans up there would give you good budgetary control. I can tell you that is not the case. That things just get spent. You do have special earmarks that you will see that are a little distressing, but a lot of it's not so much the earmarks as far as the dollar figure. But we're going to hit $10.5 billion, and the real kicker. Well, the one thing I will say, it's been what they call morally hazardous in having this $2, $3, $4 billion sitting in the bank that people haven't really cared about spending, because we got tons of money in the bank. Let's do this new program or that new program, without any like follow-up? Did the program actually do anything? Was it actually effective? I mean, there's very little interest in that. Frankly, years later, it's just you keep rolling up the money, and so yeah. But it clearly over the last 4 years has been skyrocketing. I think in the last year it was up about 5%. I think it was like from what, like 9 point. Well, they'll reevaluate the money. There's some technicalities with it, but again, even in 23 we were still in the $8 billion category, or 8.6 or 7. But spending does not get enough scrutiny.
So how much of that is like pass-through, matching funds they need for federal purposes, other things like that, that yes, you're spending more state money, but it's to draw down other money? Because that's what we would hear all the time in Topeka is, well, we need to do this so that we can get this matching.
Yeah, of course, they have the all funds budget is like $25 billion, which kind of includes federal funds and everything, and that's a whole sort of different horse. The part we really are concerned about, or that the taxpayers, you pay for, is the state general fund part, and so that's the one I really keep my eye on.
Okay. So fiscal policy-wise, the tax bill is out there. Jason, do you believe that if the governor were to veto the current iteration of the tax bill, do you think there'll be an override attempt, given how strong the House support of it was?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be an override attempt. If she vetoes it, there'll be an override attempt. And the numbers are definitely there to override in the House. And the question will be in the Senate. But I think there were 5 senators missing that night who I think all indications are they would probably vote for an override. The Senate is just so hard to predict. It's such a weird body over there. They get, you never know which person is going to just remember that I have an axe to grind from 8 years ago or something, and now I'm going to take this moment to extract my revenge for something completely unrelated. I mean, it's really weird. I don't know why you want to go over there. The dynamics over there are bonkers to me. Yeah, it's just, well, I know you only have to run for election every 4 years instead of 2. But it is really, the dynamic in the Senate is completely different. But we'll definitely have a veto override if she vetoes that. There's no scenario where we say, oh, that's okay.
Okay, Mike, now I'm going to ask you one. What are we missing by not having a representative from the Senate at these legislative forums? What are we missing? What happened? What happens over there that you say, hey, we need to know what's going on in that regard?
I don't know. I have worked quite a bit with a couple of senators over there, and I learned that when you're trying to get something done, you can, just like Jason said, it's a completely different mindset over there. What you're thinking about, what you're working on, is not on their radar. They don't know anything about it, and so when we pass something and send it over there, if you don't have somebody to help guide it through, it's just going to die. And so when I'm working on something, I make sure that I go over and find 1 or 2 or 3 senators that I can brief on it. I can get them sort of on my side, so to speak, so that they know what's going on, and work with them in the process, and even go testify in their committees and things like that. So there's some things like that you can do to kind of help smooth things out. Once again, I was in this legislative modernization, and we took on, one of the big things we took on was cybersecurity this year. We had a lot of briefings from post-audit, and it was amazing how bad our cybersecurity is for the state, for universities, for agencies, for judicial. We know the judicial system got hacked, and that was a ransomware. They did not, it's my understanding, they did not pay the ransom. They took 2 months to clean things out and go through it and all like that, and a lot of money, and fix it and get back online. But the idea is trying to kind of stop this happening in the future. So we spent a lot of time crafting a bill, the bill had problems. I didn't like the bill when they first brought it up, because it was very expensive. And we changed a lot of that, because they put a lot of IT in there. They were going to try to upgrade IT, and we said that's not necessary. And so they pared it down quite a bit to just work on the security part. We sent it over to the Senate. The Senate does not have a committee that deals with this. And so we sent it over there, and they just looked at it and went, yeah, no thanks. And so it just sat there. So we essentially wasted a lot of time this year. Really what should have happened is that somebody on the Senate side should have been on board and understanding this. There was some, it's just a simple thing. You've all gotten an email that says, hey, you wouldn't believe the picture I saw of you I saw online the other day. Click here. Or, or maybe, your rich uncle in Nigeria passed away and that you didn't know about, and we're wanting to give you some, left you $24 million, and all you got to do is click here. So those are the sorts of things is how they get in. Now, I'm just at a loss in this day and age why you would click on something like that, but especially if you work in a state agency, why you're opening things like that. But those are some of the ways that things get in. One of the things that bothered me about the way about some of the oversight that they were working on is in the universities. We've got these universities bring a lot of foreign nationals in, and they were not going to be dealing with the students. In other words, the students have got access to, to secure stuff online and things like that. Maybe they're doing some research or whatever like that. How do we know what's going on? There's an awful lot of, historically, that's a way that a lot of, foreign nationals have gotten into systems, and either stealing information. Our universities do a tremendous amount of research, and a lot of that stuff's very valuable, and a lot of countries would give anything to have that research. And so there's things like that go on, and to not have one side of the rotunda looking to help fix the problem is just kind of frustrating.
All right, final thoughts with 3 minutes left. We'll start with Representative Wagner. Anything else?
No, but just a thank you for all the folks coming out. Again, it'll be good to have somebody from the Senate, I think, here going forward at these events, just because you really need to hear. It's just very helpful. Back in the day, when I first started, of course, Senator Berger was always very good about, meeting with us at the Capitol and kind of keeping the Reno County people together. And but again, still, there's a lot of stuff. We're still getting emails from people, kind of hot and heavy, and, it's all just our names, in my case, paul.wagner, house.ks.gov, and I would love to hear from you all. Thanks.
Jason.
Yeah, thank you all for coming out. A lot of you I've seen through all of these, so it's good to see that we have an engaged group of people who want to know what's going on. I'm excited to get the last part of the session done. I think we've done some really good work this year. And as we, I think a lot of it was highlighted today. There's been a lot of examples of the House really working together and kind of setting aside some of the politics to work on policy. And I think I've been really, really encouraged by that this year. And look forward to hopefully a future where that's more the norm than the exception.
And Representative Murphy.
Ditto. I appreciate everybody coming out and the opportunity to be here. And like I said, my information is available online. My cell phone's there, and my email. And I do hear from quite a few people, and appreciate that.
Okay, one quick question. We know that Representative Murphy has filed to run for Senate. Are the other representatives on the dais, are you going to run again in 2024? I thought Paul had filed, but I couldn't remember for sure.
Yeah, no, I've already filed, so
I
I'm
thought you
definitely
had,
on the
but I
ballot.
couldn't remember if Jason had.
I haven't filed yet, but I will probably, and then when I go back up next week.
Okay. Then sounds like at least you'll have the opportunity to decide whether you want these guys to continue to represent you in Topeka or to make a change, but they've been so generous with their time, and so have you for being here throughout these all through the session. The questions have been just fabulous. I probably don't read them quite the way that they're asked all the time, but I really appreciate that people are engaged in the process and that you want to know what's going on in Topeka and you want to know what makes a difference to the general body of people. It's not just about what you personally want, which I really appreciate, but it's about knowing what's best for Kansas as a whole, not just these three, but everybody that's been in the crowd too. Thank you so much for spending time with us. It's 10:30.